Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar tonight. I'm really excited about sharing this with you, where I'll be taking you through a step-by-step process covering 7 key areas that you can improve in your life to optimize your brain function, happiness and clarity, attention and motivation, energy and much, much more over the next few months. I'm going to be showing you the 7 key areas which cause symptoms that affect your brain, leading to ADHD, ADD, learning disorders and autistic spectrum disorders, depression and anxiety, and also insomnia, overwhelming feelings of stress, distractibility and hyperactivity, behavioural problems, and foggy brain as some people describe it. One of these steps is incredibly crucial that only a handful of practitioners in Australia know about. Today will be an overview of the entire treatment so that you can get a good idea of where we'll be heading. You'll be able to begin implementing these things for you or for your child to feel clearer, happier, more focused, and on your way to a better life. So we've got lots in store that I'm really passionate about and I'm really excited to share with you, and I want to say a big welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jodi Chapman, and in the past 5 years I've seen hundreds of people through my clinic eliminate ADHD, anxiety and depression, and tonight I'm going to show you how it's possible to live a full, more confident, clearly focused and happy life drug-free. So without any further ado, what we're going to cover in this webinar is how your brain works and what can go wrong, the 7 steps to solving brain disorders such as ADHD and more for you or your child, and what's really going on inside your head. I'm going to tell you a little bit about an upcoming program called the Mind Shift. So firstly, let me tell you a little bit about ADHD and learning disorders. These conditions can affect children and adults and are not conditions that you grow out of. Rather, it follows you through to your adult life. I've treated men and women, families, I've had elderly clients, children and teenagers, and from my experience, a lot of people don't recognize that anything is wrong. They just know that things aren't right. I've heard a lot of people label children with these problems as naughty. They just don't listen because they don't want to. They try to upset the other kids, or they're attention seekers. The children that I've seen in the clinic have been nothing but kind, lovely kids that have been misunderstood in most cases. The parents see them for who they really are, but sometimes others have struggled to see that. And they are literally trying their hardest to do what is expected of them, but something in their brains causes them to behave differently. The effect that they put into being good, the effort, and then they're unrewarded, and then you can see them give up on trying. These children seem to be really happy but are often frustrated, angry at not being able to achieve what they want to, angry at home, throwing tantrums when either they're misunderstood or when in trouble for not understanding what has been asked of them. And they often feel sadness and depression as well. Not only that, if they know they're going to get in trouble, anxiety develops as another issue again. You also might see them go through times of absolute hyperactivity and a lack of focus on one particular thing, and the other extreme will be complete fatigue and they don't hear anything you say. I'll cover why this is happening soon. Did you know that children suffering with ADHD, which has the same triggers as depression and anxiety, have a much higher risk of developing depression as early as in their teenage years? In fact, as I said before, they either continue with ADHD as an adult or they develop depression instead. Now, currently 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men suffer depression or anxiety at some stage in their life. The World Health Organization has determined that by 2020, depression will be the 2nd biggest health problem worldwide. You've got to wonder why these rates are climbing. Could there be a common cause affecting everyone? Well, that's one of the things I want to look at tonight. Most people believe that antidepressants and other medications are the only choice they have. I don't believe this is true. I believe there are triggers, and I'll show you why I believe this throughout this webinar. I'm going to show you how to treat all of the symptoms from the comfort of your own home. And I'm going to show you a few case studies of clients that I've worked with who've been through the 7-step program to show you how well and easily this can be done. Just a little bit of webinar etiquette, because this is new to some of you. There are a few things you need to have in place to get the most out of it. You'll need to have a notebook that you should have in front of you and a pen. Take notes as you go, but don't panic if you miss something, as I'll go over it again. And then at the end of the webinar, you'll have a great workbook. If you're writing things down, you'll remember them a lot better. Also, if you have a question, we have Jane on the webinar who can help you with technical problems if you type them into the question box. Can anyone there see the question box? Can you put your hand up? There's a little hand icon. Some of you have seen it in the top right-hand corner. Can I get you to put your hand up there if you can see the question box? I just want to see if you guys know how to use the little hand signal to put your hand up if you need to. Great. We've got some people putting their hand up there, so that's excellent. All right, so there's a question box on the screen there, and if you have something going on that you're not really sure what to do, just type it in there and Jane will be able to help you out. Otherwise, if there's a question about the topics and you'd like to know something in particular, because we've got so much information to go through tonight, I'll get you to email me any questions that you have and I'll reply after the webinar. We have so much information that I'm going to try not to go overtime, but if I do, I hope that's all right with you. I'll try very hard to keep it as close to time as possible. Now, before we get into it, I can see by the names on the screen here that we have a lot of people registered. Some of them I haven't met before in the clinic. So with your permission, I'd like to take a few moments just to let you know a bit about who I am, what I do, and how I got to be here today. The reason behind specialising in this field is because this has been my life story since I was a kid. So for those of you who've heard my background before, please excuse me for just a moment while I fill in the others who've not heard from me before. Can I tell you though, I can get a bit technical at times. Don't panic. It'll all make sense as we go through it. There are some things that are really important that I have to share with you, and they may be a bit technical, so just hang in there and by the end of it you'll understand what I'm saying. I'd also like to let you know that at the end of today's session, for those of you who are interested, I'll share with you some ways in which you'll be able to take action to recover from your problems, and I know some of you have been looking forward to that. So if it's okay, over the next 90 minutes I'll tell you exactly how I created amazing results with my clients and give you the opportunity to do the same in your life. Now, this is me when I was a kid. I must have been around 7 there. Hang on a sec. And this is around the time when I began my journey. I was dragged by my poor mother from doctor to doctor for years, suffering with migraines and headaches at 7 years old. This is my beautiful mum with my dad here. Mum and I were inseparable. We did everything together. She took me to see every specialist and every type of practitioner you could imagine to sort these headaches out. It must have cost her a fortune. Now, this is me now, by the way. I thought I'd put this in so you know who you're listening to. Anyway, I was seeing chiropractors, acupuncturists, eye specialists, ear, nose and throat specialists, and very important migraine specialists from London who diagnosed classic cluster headaches and said I'd have them for the rest of my life. They had me on up to 9 different drugs every day until I was 16 years old, and none of them made a difference. Does anyone here know someone who's had migraines, or does anyone here ever suffer with migraines? Just raise your hand if you can see the icon there. Raise your hand if you have anything or have had anything to do with migraines. Let me just have a look. This can be interesting because it has a little bit to do with what we're talking about. We've got lots and lots of hands raised there. That's interesting. If you've ever experienced migraines in any way, you'll know how debilitating they are. I'd have my windows covered with blankets and couldn't bear any sound. I'd vomit every 20 minutes. I know that's gross, but I'd vomit every 20 minutes from 5:30 in the morning to 10:30 at night. It'd be a shot of pethidine to try to knock me out through the middle of the day. Up to the age of 14, they were happening at least once a week. But then all of a sudden, when hormones became involved, they were every day for 9 more years. I was an A-grade student, top of the year in most subjects, and within just a few weeks I was needing a tutor to keep up with my grades while I was on 8 prescription painkillers a day and caffeine tablets every 4 hours just to keep me awake. Imagine my liver. By the time I was 20, I was devastated when my mum passed away. She had a sudden heart aneurysm at the age of 48. She was fit and healthy, and if you could imagine, she was my best friend, and it was at that point, the stress that I went through from her death, plus the reason I had the migraines in the first place, put me in hospital with an autoimmune disease called ulcerative colitis. If anyone here has had ulcerative colitis, it trumps migraines for pain. For those of you who haven't heard of it, it's the most painful form of bowel disease, which causes severe agonizing cramping the minute you put food into your mouth and then every time you eat, caused by ulcers lining the bowel wall. It causes you to lose massive amounts of weight dramatically and stops you from eating through fear of the pain. For the next 2 years, I was on a high-dose cortisone drug to control all of it, which I wasn't able to get off without an acute attack, an urgent trip back to the hospital. It wasn't until I discovered a dietary cause, which then changed everything I'd ever known. It was virtually gone within 3 weeks after 16 years. This was incredibly eye-opening for me. I'd never used natural medicine before in any way. I was brought up in the medical type family. And from that day on, I decided to become a naturopath to treat other people struggling to find causes to their problems, since I'd been through the medical system for 16 years without success. Now, this isn't to say that doctors aren't good at what they do. There are a lot of doctors that I work really closely with, but there's a lot more out there than most people know. Now, who's wondering what migraines and bowel diseases have to do with ADHD or brain disorders? Well, not a lot of people know that the same thing that causes migraines also causes behavioural problems, or that during a migraine, your concentration levels drop through the floor and your mind goes foggy, like you're in a cloud, exactly how children with ADHD or ADD can feel throughout times in the day. The causes of migraine and bowel disease also contribute to depression and anxiety as well. And if you had have asked my parents through my childhood if they thought I had ADHD, the answer would have been a resounding yes, with the tantrums I used to throw day in, day out, kicking the walls, breaking my things, fighting with my brother and sister. This was while I was at home. But while I was at school, I did what I could to avoid the other kids, sitting alone, feeling as if I didn't fit in, with periods of anxiety, sadness and depression. I look back now and know how ridiculous it was. But in the mental state I was in at the time, it caused me a great deal of stress, as I now see in other children in the clinic. I completed my degree in health science and have since treated a lot of people with mental health issues and come across some really interesting things that aren't very well known or treated for in the medical industry. I've also trained as a neurotherapist with Dr. Jacques Duff, a leading psychologist in this field, and I research brain neurotransmitters and brainwaves so that I can specialise in this area. I regularly speak to experts such as Dr. Henry Butt in the research labs in Melbourne University and other specialists in this field, and I'll share with you today how important these key areas are in putting together the jigsaw puzzle that creates the brain imbalances causing these problems, because it is a jigsaw puzzle. So for those of you who are new to my clinic, Advanced Wellness and Behavioural Centre, that's a little bit about who I am and why I'm very passionate about this topic, as this has virtually been my life's work. I'm determined to teach as many people as I can about these really important steps because I believe these health issues can be permanently erased. And in autistic cases, dramatically improved at least. So once again, I'm really excited to be able to share with you what is possible with the 7 key areas starting with tonight's webinar. So, how do we solve the puzzle? There are 3 stages we need to go through to be able to successfully solve this problem. Firstly, we need to recognise what's going on for you or your child and understand the underlying causes, whether it originates from a biochemical imbalance, so a physical response to something, or whether it comes from a psychological origin or stress, and if that then triggers a physical response. You'll find later on, you'll see they'll impact on each other. Stress will occur in both cases, and stress lowers your nutrient levels, which then reduces your brain chemicals. So resolving the stressful situations is an important part. We then need to recognise that the key areas that cause mental health problems in most cases actually compound each other. What this means is that if you only had one underlying trigger, you most likely wouldn't have a mental health problem because your body can usually deal with one thing pretty well on its own. It's the compounding effect of one on top of the other which gradually drives you into behavioural, attention or mood disorders or anything else that's going on. So take in every step as if it could be you or your child, even if it feels like it's something that isn't a problem for you, because it really could be. The second part we need to know is how to repair these imbalances, deficiencies or situations. These will be the 7 steps, where we'll be looking at biochemical repair. I've had clients who have come into the clinic behavioural, mood and concentration problems where they're not functioning well at all in life, and it's all been started by a traumatic event. They've then sought counselling, which was helpful, but it didn't improve the situation. Just as I said before, my first approach is to make sure your body can make all the ingredients needed for brain chemicals so that the counselling can work. How can your brain work to cope with or recover from a trauma if there are not enough ingredients needed to make your brain work? It can't. So this is why the second step is repair, which is a biochemical approach. It's making all the biochemical pathways full of nutrients so there's nothing stopping you from getting better. The third and final part I want to address is reprogramming. After removing all of the outside triggers that can reduce yours and your child's brain chemicals, which cause all of the symptoms, and then repairing any physical deficiencies or damage that's occurring that may be hurdles to getting well, then most of you will be 100% well by that stage. The reprogramming part comes in when our brain has learned bad habits too well. Imagine your child's mind develops and learns at an incredible rate between birth and 6 or 7 years old. If during this time some outside source, such as any substance that changes the brain, or even if they were raised in an environment of fear or other kind of stress, however their brain is working most of the time during these years is how it will stay. If they have constantly been in a state of aggressive or bad behavior, poor concentration, hyperactivity or foggy brain, depression or anxiety, this then becomes permanent because that's the only thing your brain has ever learned. The great news is, though, that just as we learn them by being exposed to incorrect brainwave patterns for too long, we can retrain the brain correctly by doing almost exactly the same thing for just a few months and reverse it. We'll go over brainwave patterns in more detail at the end of the webinar, but what I want you to know is that if you 1. Repair the body biochemically, 2. Address and improve any outside causes and stop further damage, and 3. Reprogram any brainwave irregularities, then there is nothing that stands in your way to recovering from ADHD, ADD, learning disorders, behavioral problems, depression and anxiety, and for that matter, autistic spectrum disorders and many other more severe brainwave problems can also be improved. It's really only limited when it comes to structural problems. So let's first look at recognizing the symptoms and the possible deficiencies of brain chemicals. This is where it can get a bit technical, so listen really closely. There are a number of different chemicals or neurotransmitters which are chemicals your body produces that can affect your brain. Some of you have heard of serotonin, right? Most antidepressants just work on this brain neurotransmitter, but you'll see that more than serotonin can cause problems, which is why it's not always helpful to be on antidepressants. Most of you will know that low serotonin can cause depression, but how many of you have heard of dopamine? Can I just get you to put your hands up if you've heard of serotonin or dopamine? Yeah? Good. Okay. Well, they both play a part in different kinds of behavioural changes and brain disorders such as ADHD, learning disorders, ASD, which is autism spectrum disorders, depression and anxiety. Let's first look at what they do for us when we get enough of them. Serotonin controls mood, sleep and eating behaviours. Sugar cravings can be a problem if your serotonin is low. You've heard of binge eating during depression or alcoholism, as alcohol satisfies the sugar cravings. Without the right levels of serotonin, we start to see things like insomnia, irritability, and over or under eating before we see the signs of behavioural changes. Dopamine controls movement, makes you feel like you have pleasure in your life, that feeling of being really happy when you're out in the sun on a nice day, really appreciating life. This is dopamine at work. I like to describe a dopamine deficient person a bit like the couch potato who doesn't want to go to school, work, exercise, doesn't want to play with their friends anymore if it's a child, doesn't want to go out and socialize anymore if it's an adult, or do anything they used to like doing. Everything bores them, including the TV they're watching, but they don't want to do anything else. They also feel really physically tired all the time. Now, GABA is the opposite to the first two. GABA is what they call an inhibitory neurotransmitter. It's getting a bit technical here, but just listen closely. What this means is that its job is to stop overexcitement or to stop too much nerve activity, where dopamine and serotonin are excitatory. So their job is to boost your nerve activity. Serotonin makes you happy. Dopamine makes you happy. But GABA stops you from being too excited. So this means that GABA's job is so important in calming down overexcitement, hyperactivity, hypervigilance in ADHD, aggression, anxiety, and reducing seizures in epilepsy. Really important for epilepsy. The last neurotransmitter that we'll be talking about today is acetylcholine. This is one of my favorites. There are more than these neurotransmitters in the body, in the brain, but these are the main ones that I want to talk about. Acetylcholine's main job is to control your nervous system that digests your food. It makes you feel happy and relaxed. They call it your rest and digest neurotransmitter, as opposed to the fight or flight system. If you're under a lot of stress, you tend to end up caught in the fight or flight response, which makes you want to rush everywhere, you lose your patience, you can't relax, so no patience. It helps with emotional expression. Imagine those children who don't express themselves emotionally or can't understand other children emotionally. It helps with cognitive function, which means clear, quick thinking. It helps you remember everything, and it helps you digest your food and reduces your stress. It's a really good one to have around. I found when people are stressed and they're craving sugars, taking extra of this will stop that from happening, and it really balances them out and makes you feel quite calm. So, what happens if something goes wrong? Well, let's see if you can pick the type of brain chemical imbalance you or your child might have. Low serotonin can be found in the brain in any brain disorder conditions and can include anger, aggression, irritability. People with bad tempers are usually low in serotonin. Then there are others who suffer with anxiety, panic attacks, some with foggy brain, insomnia, feelings of sadness. You can have more pain sensitivity, such as migraine, alcohol and sugar cravings in adults and children, and addictions, impulsiveness, and in severe cases, suicidal behaviour. Can you see anything in that group of symptoms that sounds a little bit like you? What about your child? Does anyone recognise seeing your kids get angry and break things or throw tantrums? Do they get snappy or speak rudely when they were an angel a minute ago? Do they take in what you're saying, or are they foggy? Are they impulsive? What about sugar cravings? That's usually a really big one for kids. How about getting aggressive and hurting other children, or losing control emotionally and going through fits of extreme anger or uncontrollable crying? Just put your hand up if you've seen that in either yourself or your children. It's interesting, isn't it? This is one of the most common brain neurotransmitter deficiencies that there is, which is why they make all the antidepressants of these, but it's good. A lot of you will put up your hands. In other people, dopamine levels can drop and they may withdraw from friends and family and have no motivation, poor memory, and mental and physical fatigue, just really tired all the time. These people can often be seen as lazy, but they may not be lazy at all. It's really obvious when they don't want to go to school anymore, or don't exercise like they used to, or if you're an adult, don't want to work anymore, or you don't do anything that you used to enjoy doing. I had one adult client who loved sewing, had sewed clothes and blankets and teddy bears for decades, and then just stopped halfway through everything and sat on the lounge and did nothing for years. I've even seen people go through such strong dopamine deficiency that even though they knew they were going broke from not working enough, they didn't care. They just went into debt up to about $50,000 in about 6 months. Couldn't care less anymore, even though they knew what was happening. You'll see it in your children as fatigue. They might say no to you if you ask them to do things. Having no energy, maybe wanting to sleep in or sleeping a lot. GABA will contribute to hyperactivity or an overly high mood rather than the lows of depression. Typically, excessive emotional type symptoms such as anxiety, alcohol and sugar cravings, insomnia, irritability, panic attacks, seizures, and destructive behaviour. Acetylcholine deficiencies are really common, as you'll find out later. It's really easy to use up what you've got in your body. Any form of stress will drop your levels really quickly. Hyperactivity is also a symptom of this one, and poor attention, poor short-term memory, poor concentration and focus, fatigue and confusion, anxiety, and these people react really poorly to stress. And this can happen at any age, though often sounds like what children go through, and then they're diagnosed with ADHD. And yes, you can be low in more than one. They are all made up of the same types of necessary nutrients, so any deficiency at all will make you drop and use them all up, and you can run out of more than one at a time. So how do we lose them? Well, to tell you that, you need to understand a little bit about the brain and the body connection. Actually, the brain and the gut connection. You may remember from school, I don't know if you remember this or not, but the brain is called the central nervous system. Well, the gut is called the enteric nervous system. And what most people don't know is that in that grey mushy stuff that makes up your bowel, which looks a bit like the grey mushy stuff in our brain, is the same nerves using the same brain neurotransmitters to make our digestion work as well. How many people here know that 80% of our body serotonin is used in our gut and only 20% is used in your brain? Just give me a show of hands to let me know if you've heard. If you haven't heard of serotonin being used in the gut, tell me if you haven't heard of serotonin being used in the gut. It's one of the most said comments in my clinic that people don't realize that most of the serotonin makes your bowels work. For those of you who don't know, serotonin's job in the gut is to make your bowels move. So when you don't have enough serotonin, you can also suffer with constipation. A lot of people with behavior or brain disorders also suffer with constipation. So remember also that I said acetylcholine controls digestion. Well, acetylcholine is mainly found in the gut too. So when you upset your gut, you lose a lot of acetylcholine that way, and then you can end up in the fight or flight response. Or you might find yourself with gut symptoms like diarrhea or long-term irritable bowel syndrome for no apparent reason. All the brain neurotransmitters are made from the nutrients we get in our food, which has to come through the gut wall in the first place. So if there's anything wrong with your digestion, we're most likely going to have something wrong with the brain. So which came first, the brain or the gut? It can be different for everyone. Some people will go through a major trauma, firstly using up a lot of their neurotransmitters, and then their gut will become a problem. But others will develop a problem in the gut first, and then the mood disorders will follow. This is what we often see in children. Some are born with gut problems, so you won't know, which is why we need to address both. So if you affect one, you'll always affect the other. Now that you know what they are and what they do and how we lose them, let's move on to the second part of the webinar, and that is how to repair them. The 7 steps to solving ADHD. So what's really going on inside your head? I'm firstly going to show you the 7 steps so you know where we're heading, and then I'll show you how all these steps affect the brain and why it's so crucial that you can't miss a step. I also want you to remember what I said about a compounding problem. One step on top of another makes symptoms worse. This is my little picture of you, just to remind you that the 7 steps will weigh down on you more and more, the more of them that are out of balance for you or your children. So I've got you holding all the steps above you, so don't forget. This is why you see people with different levels and severity of ADHD, ADD, and so many variations of autism, obsessive compulsive disorder, and more. No two people are the same in the causes behind their problems, which is why you can't just say that one thing or another causes these conditions. It could be a combination of all of them. Step 1 is allergy. Now everyone's heard of that. There are a few things that will lower your brain neurotransmitters that will be covered in other steps, but allergy can cause your serotonin to drop in more ways than one. It also isn't necessarily the first thing to go wrong. So when we go over it, I'll tell you more about it. Step 2 is bacteria. Bacterial overgrowths in the gut are one thing that is never addressed when it comes to mental health. I found it to be one of the biggest triggers of all, especially autism, but in every case of ADHD I've seen. I have a lot of interesting things to tell you about them. What you need to know though is that I'm talking about bacteria that's meant to be there in a normal human gut. So it's never checked by your doctor and is completely underestimated. We'll go over that soon. Step 3 is diet. I'm sure you've all heard that diet is important, at least to be on a healthy diet. But not every diet that is a healthy diet helps the brain. There is a very particular way to eat to improve brain function, and we'll go over that as well. Step 4 is nutrients. I've already mentioned over and over how if any of your ingredients that make your brain neurotransmitters are missing, then there is no way of making them without addressing these deficiencies. The most important thing to tell you is that at this stage is that all 3 of the first steps, allergies, bacteria, and poor diet, all cause nutrients to be depleted. So this is why it's at step 4. Step 5 is stress. We discussed earlier how a traumatic event or an ongoing stressful situation can trigger behavioral or mood disorders in the first place. But stress can also come about because all of the first 4 steps were out of balance. Just like I mentioned with acetylcholine. If you upset your gut wall with an irritant, such as an allergen or a bacteria, the wrong diet, or poor nutrients, stress will then become the symptom and not the cause. We'll be covering what happens with stress a little bit later on. Step 6 is toxicity. A lot of people have heard about artificial colors, preservatives, heavy metals, chemical sensitivities, and more. This is what most people believe is the only cause. It can be a huge contributing factor, but not the whole case. We'll see how to manage these shortly. Step 7 is brainwaves. Now, like I mentioned before, this is last. The brainwave patterns can cause all of the behavioral problems alone, but from experience and common sense, you need to make sure that the brain is fully functioning physically before you look here to give it a chance to work well on its own. If you rule out all physical causes of brainwave impairment, then you can address the brainwave patterns in their true state more clearly. So without any further ado, on to step 1, which is allergies. They can present themselves as digestive problems, bloating, pain after eating food, and sinus or hay fever. And most people believe if they don't get these types of symptoms, then they don't have allergies. I've tested over 300 people for food allergies, and every single one of them has come back with at least some, and mostly a hefty list. So don't assume that it doesn't affect you or your child. Allergy affects the brain very quickly by reducing your serotonin, and in this case, the first sign you see is irritability or huge tantrums and uncontrollable crying in the children, or anger and aggression, so attacking other kids and other bad behavior. Or they could get anxiety right after eating. But then typically those bad mood symptoms are followed by sleepiness and body weakness or tiredness, wanting to sit down or lie down, maybe take a nap after lunch, which isn't really supposed to happen, unless they're very little, of course. You should get energy from your food. After all, food is fuel for your body. The problem with allergy is that not only does it affect your serotonin level immediately, but it then causes your gut wall to become irritated and inflamed. And then you don't absorb the nutrients from your food, which then lowers your ability to make the other brain neurotransmitters. And then lining your gut up for overgrowths of the wrong kinds of bacteria, and on it goes. An allergic person can have a lot of difficulty falling asleep each night because the serotonin is low, and serotonin is really needed for sleep. But once an allergic person finally falls asleep, they sleep very long hours or feel very tired when they wake. Let's see how it works. So, how does the reaction drop our serotonin? Well, let's have a look at how serotonin works. Firstly, to make serotonin, you need protein. So meat, chicken, fish, eggs, dairy, or other protein sources of foods. Then you need some vitamins and minerals. And then an enzyme called 5-HTP, which we're going to learn a lot about, which converts all of these nutrients to serotonin. Easy, right? Well, it is, actually. The serotonin then makes us happy. And with another enzyme called SAMe, then converts the serotonin over to melatonin, which makes us sleep really well. What's important to know is that the 5-HTP and the SAMe, they're enzymes our bodies make. You can't get them in food, so you need to use them in the right places. The problem is that your liver also uses them to clean you out or to detoxify you. This means if you drink a lot of alcohol or take a lot of drugs for adults, hopefully not children, or if you have a lot of allergies for adults and children, your liver will come along, and within 10 or 20 minutes from eating those foods, your 5-HTP drops from your brain and goes to help the liver. It's then that your mood drops or your child starts to throw a tantrum for no apparent reason on and off through the day, or they won't sleep anymore and neither will you. So insomnia becomes a problem as well as mood changes. So let's see it in action. This is an allergy test. In fact, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that this is actually my allergy test. And you'll see there are 56 common foods in the red, orange and yellow section that I'm allergic to. I tried for years to work out my allergens by taking food out of my diet and adding it back in. Nothing made a difference because in the same day I was eating about another 10 things that were keeping me in an allergic state. There is no way I could have worked it out without a test. Now, there are a few different tests that you can get done here in Australia, but there is only one that I believe is worth spending any money on, as the others will even tell you that they could be wrong. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about allergies that you should really know. If you look closely at my test, you'll see that I was tested for gluten in the blue section. The blue column is the second column, and it's the second sentence in that column. But I had no allergy to gluten. Now, I was told that I had to stay off gluten and dairy to fix my bowel and allergy problems when I was younger. But I have no gluten allergy at all, and am in fact allergic to 2 grains that they add into gluten-free products. So I'm more allergic to gluten-free products than I am allergic to gluten products. The point I want to make here is that you can't guess what you're allergic to, firstly. And secondly, out of the 300 or so tests that I've done on my clients, there is no majority of people gluten or dairy allergic. Every test is so different that I couldn't pick a more common food than another. So if someone tries to tell you that you must be allergic to those 2 things and to take them out of the diet, they really can't know unless they test it for you. I'm going to show you a few case studies along the way, and you'll notice the differences in the tests. It's really important, as this is one of the biggest causes of brain neurotransmitter loss, and it also causes brainwave pattern changes. So long-term allergies can cause lifelong behavioural changes, even after removing the foods, if you've eaten them for long enough. Another important thing to know about allergies is that after you eat them, you cause your gut to be inflamed. Then when you eat something you're not allergic to, it also then has the ability to leak through and to become an allergen. Over time, if you don't stop the gut inflammation, you end up with an allergen list as long as mine. And I believe that that's the reason why my allergy list is as long as it is, because I went so long without realizing that it was allergies. I now have a really restricted and difficult diet to follow for the rest of my life. And you don't get a choice about it then. You can't just stop the diet and it'll all go away. If you suspect your child has allergies, don't waste time wondering. The longer you leave it, the longer their list gets. You have the power as a parent to make their life easier if you deal with it right now. Just to give you an example, if I eat anything with eggs in it, within minutes I'm thinking negative thoughts about everything going on in my life. Anything that bothers me, I'll start to think about. I'll get anxiety and palpitations, and if I'm not aware that it's the food, I can very easily start picking a fight with my husband. It drives him crazy, but we know what it is now, thank goodness he understands, or I'd be in all sorts of trouble. Let me show you how it works. This is a scan that we run in the clinic. Now, being so allergic, I'm a really good guinea pig for testing and measuring different changes going on in the body. And this is me. You'll see at the top of the screen in the middle my name and the time of 3:01 p.m. Now, if you look at the top left corner, you'll see an overall scan of the body. The grey area shows normal body tissue and the yellow area shows inflammation. Where it's blue also shows inflammation. This is all grey except there in the lungs, where food that I've eaten is just passing through the esophagus, causing that inflammation in the lungs. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see my brain, and there is no irritation or malfunction of the brain at that point. It's all grey. Now, I have scanned myself again just 2 hours later, and if you now look at the top left corner of my body, you'll see the liver and the stomach are blue, which means they are having difficulty dealing with something. At the same time that the liver is affected, you'll notice the brain also drops in function. It goes blue as well. And the first comment you see in the dialogue box, which is to the right, at the bottom for the brain, shows cerebral serotonin reduced. As soon as the liver is affected by the food, so too is the brain. Sadly, I have passed on this trait to my 7-year-old daughter, who I thought I'd show you, as her scan was only very recent when she was at home and I knew she'd eaten something she would normally have troubles with, but she'd started to become really upset, out of the ordinary type behaviour, crying for hours, wanting to break things, saying some really scary things about how she felt about herself, really negative thoughts, just not like her at all. So I brought her down to the clinic. It was 7:55 p.m. to scan and see what was happening because I was really worried about what was going on for her. Now, this is her scan about 20 minutes into the allergic reaction. You see then her lungs are already showing inflammation near the esophagus. And so far, if you look at the bottom left corner of the scan, you can see that initially her dopamine is already dropping. This is the little purple box you can see at the bottom left-hand corner. The red line to the left is the low end, and the red line at the top is the upper end. So you can see it's heading towards the low end. The low dopamine was causing her low mood, and she was really becoming quite fatigued really quickly, which is what dopamine does when it drops. Now, this is the final scan that I did over the 17-minute period. We were there following her reactions. You can now see in the full body scan the inflammation is affecting not only the lungs but the gut and the tip of the liver. You also see the bottom left corner. Not only the dopamine but the serotonin and the catecholamine, which indicates adrenal fatigue, are also well below the normal line. All three of those neurotransmitters are well below the levels they should be, and this is within 37 minutes of initially eating the food. You can see in the bottom right corner the dialog box for the brain, which reads possibility of dysmic or unspecified depression, possibility of emotional disorder. Depression is experienced by the patient through a feeling of lassitude or lack of vitality. And if you read the very bottom line, you'll see the scan has picked up anxiety and phobias. Now, this is a 7-year-old who is extremely fit and healthy. She does gymnastics, she's lean, she's muscular, and is normally really cheerful, the joker that's always laughing. I know when she's eating something she shouldn't, when she starts to tell me that she has no friends and she has plenty. She thinks a lot of negative thoughts and her self-esteem drops. This is really alarming for me because I know it's the food, and her brain immediately switches to negative thoughts, doubts about herself, and extreme unhappiness. If you knew her and her loving and bubbly personality, you couldn't imagine she could feel like this. I can't express to you more than that how crucial it is to know if you're allergic or not, or if your child is. Even if yours or your child's behavioural or brain disorder began because of a traumatic event, it could be that event that upsets your gut wall, creates the allergens, and from then on, ADHD, anxiety, depression, and anything else never go away because you're unaware of what's happened to your body physically. This then can start the downward spiral towards more severe mental health problems. Now, moving on to step 2, which is bacteria. I'm talking about the bacteria that's meant to be in the human body, not Giardia or Cryptosporidium, which is what you generally find is tested in the doctor's office. Everyone's heard of E. coli, right? This is the one that we hear on the news. It's the one they say makes you sick if you pick it up when traveling. But in fact, all of the tests I've run on my clients, which is well over 300, E. coli is usually too low, and this affects your brain in a negative way. Streptococcus, Staphylococcus, and Enterococcus. So you might have heard of strep throat or staph. Enterococcus, they're also meant to be there, but in such low levels that they can't harm you. These, in fact, cause all of the problems. Candida, most people have been told about that. Actually, most people have been told they have that. And I find in testing that only half or less of my clients have a problem with it. It can still do some damage mentally, though, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, but it doesn't cause these kind of problems that we're talking about tonight. Then there's Bifidobacterium, Lactobacillus, and Clostridium, which are all normal bacteria. They need to be there to do their jobs, such as helping you absorb your vitamins from your food. But if you have an overgrowth of any of the bacteria above, generally you won't then have enough of these good guys. The first one to know about is E. coli. Now, it's actually meant to take up about 70 to 90% of your gut bacteria, which is a lot. One of its roles is to help you make your brain neurotransmitters. Not enough will cause any brain disorder, any kind of mental health problem. So if you're eating plenty of proteins but you're not building muscle, or your child is really underweight or too lean, or if you're not making enough hormones, or if your moods are low, no matter what you do, this could be the problem. Now, E. coli is the same type of bacteria as strep, staph, or enterococcus. They're the same type of bacteria. But if these E. coli if the strep, staph, and enterococcus are too high, they'll put pressure on the E. coli and drop them, which is really bad news. Strep, staph, and enterococcus are the biggest cause of all mental health and gut conditions that I've seen. I've not seen any person that comes into my office with symptoms that haven't had these overgrowths. This is just as important to treat as allergies is, and this is why I've made these two the most important 2 steps. So the first 2 being that they are the biggest physical causes of behavioural and brain problems. How it works is that strep or the others create lactic acid in your gut in a way that we can't get rid of it. We can't actually remove it again. So the higher the bacterial overgrowth is, the worse the symptoms are. The lactic acid increases every emotion you have to a level that's unbearable. If you're allergic and your serotonin is low, it will drop more severely with this bacterial overgrowth on top. So if your child is stressed because of school or a change in their plans, which is what you see in ASD, or for any other reason, the bacteria will accentuate their emotions so much that they won't cope, and they may be uncontrollable. Every little thing that's stressful will feel like it's extremely overwhelming. It causes symptoms like insomnia, anger, depression, anxiety, foggy thinking, palpitations and nerve pain in your hands and your feet. When you see children wake really often through the night saying that they're really scared for no reason whatsoever. When these are treated though, most people feel at least 70 to 80% better. It's really incredible. Candida is the last one. Can I just get a hand raise on who's heard of Candida? Let me see who's heard of Candida. Every second person that comes into my clinic say that they've been to a naturopath before and they've been diagnosed with Candida. Most oftentimes, though, they haven't had a test done, so it's a bit of a guess. Candida causes bloating, fatigue, confusion, depression, mood swings, sugar cravings, and acne. So it's really important to also address if this is a problem. So, you know when you eat carbohydrates and you get bloated or you feel a bit windy, that's usually Candida at work. This is an example of the levels of a healthy bacterial balance you're meant to have. Notice E. coli is high at the left, and the strep is in the middle, which is supposed to be low, and so is the Candida. Now, this is an example of what I find in all of my mental health clients, not only ADHD, but anxiety, depression, and autism too. It's so common, I treat my family for it regularly, as it causes such debilitating mood changes. Now, this is the difference between the two. Remember, E. coli makes our brain chemicals from our protein, but without it, we develop symptoms, and Streptococcus makes all of our symptoms much worse. So there's a lot of work to do to get this balance right again. But that impacts the brain incredibly. What a lot of people don't know is that you can pick these bacteria up in higher doses when you travel overseas and drink the water. I often see clients that tell me they got a tummy bug while traveling and their symptoms started shortly after. But even your symptoms can start up to 18 months later. You need to think about that and see if you can correlate when your problems began and if it could be related to an overseas holiday. It also gets passed around at school between the kids, and the sensitive kids, the ones with allergens, are the ones that start to react to it. The mother can pass it on to the baby at birth, or other siblings could have had it before the baby was born, which will then show as ADHD or autism at a really young age. It will then cause the child to develop allergies through their childhood. So you can see how it works. First, the E. coli is too low. It causes too low brain neurotransmitters, so not enough, and you begin to suffer with ADHD, ASD, and behavioural changes, depression and anxiety. Then the strep comes along and makes lactic acid from your diet. We make lactic acid normally when we exercise, and it's also used in our brain for effective brain function. So you see, bacteria enhances what your brain is already doing. If you have any mental health symptoms, you're going to feel those symptoms at an incredibly accentuated level that just removing the bacteria allows an amazing improvement. They shouldn't be ignored. The bacteria also then cause gut inflammation, allowing more infections, low immune system, and more allergies to develop, beginning a vicious cycle in the gut if you don't treat it. Just to illustrate the first two steps, I want to tell you a story. A young family, father, mother, and an 8-year-old son, came in to see me in the clinic one day. They were such a down-to-earth, well-educated and well-mannered family. The father sat in the seat opposite me and the mother in the next seat, and the son leant against her. He was a lovely kid, and he just waited, listened, and spoke when I asked him questions. His parents had been down that long road, as many of you here tonight I bet have been down, and are still going down, of seeing doctors, pediatricians, psychologists, therapists, school counsellors, and more. Their son had been diagnosed with ADHD, had been suffering with anxiety, irritability, and often became angry at home and even worse at school, to the point of being uncontrollable. He couldn't focus on his work, and when spoken to, often didn't respond. He was hyperactive a lot of the time and jumped from one thing to another constantly, never staying on one subject long enough to learn anything, and would do this in conversation as well. He was often destructive, breaking things without thought or care of who it belonged to, had difficulty learning anything, and when the first signs of ADHD were noticed, they were told by the school that he would have to be treated with medication, and there was nothing else that they could do. I'd heard this before from many parents about their children, though some had not chosen to use the medication yet, but all were told that they had no other choice. In this case, this was right at the time. He was then medicated with Ritalin. His parents were told to pick him up each day at school at lunchtime, well before end of school. His medication was wearing off by then, and I've heard this now happen in a couple of cases. His behaviour became completely unacceptable by about lunchtime. He was to spend his morning tea break under supervision away from the other children. This was an enormous burden on the family. So they struggled with split shifts working to pick him up on time. As I'd seen with the other kids I'd treated, Dylan was a lovely kid, happy to talk to, not disruptive or rude. His parents were lovely and taught him to be well-mannered. This was while he was medicated, of course. Their goal was to manage his symptoms better, and they were told there was no other answer, and they had to deal with this situation. They had no other choice. They needed to get the school to allow him to stay longer, as things were getting tough at home with the financial pressures. So they really had to find something else. After explaining to Dylan's parents the causes of ADHD, we went through the processes of how to eliminate them. They were so relieved just to hear that there was something else that they hadn't tried before that had proven results. Dylan's mum began to cry. I almost cried myself. You could see the family were at breaking point. Have you ever felt so exhausted by all your options failing that you just want to give up, but you know you can't, so you feel more exhausted? Has anyone here ever felt like that? Just raise your hands if you've ever felt that kind of trapped feeling. There's a few of you raising your hands. We began with this allergy testing, in which we found with him he had 22 common foods such as string beans, bananas, cabbage, pepper, some nuts. Can you guys see that? Can you just put your hands up if you can see that list clearly? It's a little bit unclear, but hopefully you can see in the left hand of the screen the red, orange and yellow section. They're the list of allergens. All the green section on the right were the foods that were tested that he could eat. He had some nuts that he was allergic to, but he had a really strong reaction to baker's yeast, which is in all bread and almost all bakery foods. He'd been eating these every day. It didn't matter though. It doesn't have to be many. If you just eat one of your allergens, it'll be a problem. He was eating about 5 of these allergens every day. You see though, he's not dairy or gluten intolerant. You can't assume that these are allergens for you. You need to know that you can't guess what you're allergic to. The most alarming thing we found was in his bacterial test shortly after, which was that his strong allergies were even more enhanced by an overgrowth of enterococcus, which was 7 million times the level it should have been. We began treatment and more testing and finding Dylan's serotonins levels were dropping throughout the day, causing him to feel anger and made it difficult for him to focus. His severe reactions to foods were causing anything he found too stressful to be really overwhelming. So as soon as he got stressed, he'd throw a tantrum to remove himself from the situation. He was a child at the end of his ability to cope. After treating these problems and supporting Dylan's brain chemical production, we gave him some nutrients as well. He was doing really well. And the school had decided to allow him to stay until the normal school hours at 3 o'clock within only 7 weeks of beginning his treatment. I remember the day his father rang me to tell me the good news. It was really amazing. I want you to understand how relevant and common it is to have these two problems, and the symptoms range widely from person to person. Soon enough you'll see, but the causes are often the same. The lactic acid produced by the bacteria can cause physical nerve pain, chronic fatigue syndrome in some people, and fibromyalgia as well. Your brain uses our own form of lactic acid for brain function, thought, and emotions. When you have bacteria producing massive amounts of a form of lactic acid that mimics our own, so it's then extremely enhanced by sometimes up to 1,000 times, then you have no control over your brain function at all. We don't have an enzyme to break down the lactic acid that comes from the bacteria, which is why we become so overwhelmed by it. I found that 87% of all of my clients had these infections, and 68% had low E. coli. It can take months to get them under control if done the right way. Otherwise, it lasts for years or decades. This is an extremely crucial step to rule out before moving on to repairing the body physically, as no amount of taking good bacteria that you can pick up from a pharmacy can overcome an overgrowth as high as these have been shown to be. I found if we don't rule out these first, you can't create a permanent state of health in any health condition. Also, just about these tests, there's been amazing research on these bacteria since 1992, which began at the University of Newcastle and now is carried on at the Melbourne University. There's no other medical test that will give us the same information about your gut health. If finding out about your child's bacterial level is really important to you, I'll let you know more about how you can do that towards the end of the webinar. Step 3 is diet. A healthy diet could be a low-fat diet, a low-sugar diet, a vegetarian or vegan diet, a no-junk food diet, or an organic whole food diet, right? No, not necessarily, at least not for your brain. Your diet can reduce your symptoms of ADHD and behavioral or learning disorders overnight. There's a way to completely improve your child's symptoms or your symptoms virtually overnight if you eat right for your brain. And it's instant. It's not always about what food you choose to eat. I try to get my clients to pick their favorite foods from each food group and use those in the diet. The key to a successful diet is how you put these foods together. You need to, 1, control insulin. If you control insulin, you control your entire health. Insulin is something everyone has heard about because of diabetes, right? Number 2, you need to control inflammation. Inflammation will cause your gut wall to become unstable, upsetting your gut again, which then affects the brain. Number 3 is you can use your diet to immediately reduce the bacterial and yeast levels in your gut, which improves your brain function. On the other hand, if you don't address diet at all, it could be your diet that causes your mental health problems in the first place. So really, your diet has to be tailored to suit your brain, your allergens, your bacteria, and the foods you like to eat. Let's take eggs, for example. Remember, eggs are an extremely nutritious and healthy food, but remember what I said about me eating them? If I eat them, like I said before, I get immediate anxiety, irritability, and then just a few hours later, I need to sleep it off. No two diets should be the same. The great news is that once you get your diet right, not only does it make you happy almost instantly, but you lose fluid retention, you lose body fat and gain muscle, and it makes your liver produce an enzyme that detoxifies you. It can balance your hormones better. It lowers triglycerides and cholesterol in as little as 3 months, controls and prevents diabetes and heart disease, and reduces all the pain of arthritis and stops it in its tracks. Who wouldn't want that? The result in adults and children on this diet has been incredible. Children that I've seen who've been underweight have filled out with so much more lean muscle, and the same goes with adults. Have you ever wondered if your diet is right for you or for your children? Do you know what you're giving them, whether they're the right levels or not? A young woman came in to see me just a little while ago, about 9 months ago. She was 30 years of age, she'd been diagnosed with ADHD as a child and had been medicated with so many different kinds of drugs, it was incredible. Still, after 20 years, she was in the same situation. Poor concentration, foggy mind all of the time was the most annoying complaint she had. Though she also often felt a nervous energy. Imagine that feeling you get when you know you have to do something that's really important, but you can't think of what it is. And you know that if you don't figure it out, something bad will happen, or you get that feeling that something bad will happen. Have you ever felt like that? I know I have. Happens when I eat eggs, actually. Well, she felt like this all of the time. It was hard for her to describe, but this was her interpretation of anxiety, mixed with ups and downs of anger and irritability at different times of the day. She struggled still with hyperactive energy, impatience, and sometimes described waking up and wanting a glass of scotch or bourbon or a cigarette, even though she barely drank and never smoked. It was a really strange feeling. She'd go through phases of low energy and low motivation, and then she'd be up again, exercising but feeling worse after it. Her goal was to once and for all fix these problems so she could get off her medication and achieve the goals she had in life. Sarah's allergy test came back with really complicated allergens, which took months and months to correct and included a really long list of common foods. She wasn't gluten allergic like most people assume, though she was dairy allergic. The worst allergy that she had was being allergic to candida. Now remember, I mentioned candida before. Candida is a fungus that grows in your gut. It's not a food, and it's a normal fungus or yeast that grows in the human gut. What this means is that the only way to stop her from having an allergic reaction every single day was to completely eradicate candida from her system, which literally can take between 6 months and a year. This meant being so careful with what she ate, as it wasn't just as simple as not eating the foods she was allergic to. Her bacterial test came back showing an E. coli reading of only 30%, which should have been up to 80%. So she wasn't making the brain chemicals she needed either, and her strep level was well over what it should have been, enhancing every allergic response she went through, causing ADHD-type symptoms. So this is exactly what I normally see in all these cases with the bacterial test. We could tell from this test that she carried a low dose of candida, which would have been okay in any other person as it wasn't above normal, it wasn't too high. But for her, because it was an allergen, it had to go. We had to get rid of it. A lot of practitioners will assume the gut problems you have are candida without testing, like I mentioned before, and they'll treat you for that instead. It's not the same treatment, so just be aware of that. Finally, after months of treatment, she has made incredible improvements and isn't having the allergic reactions anymore. So finally, we've killed off that candida. She's now going really well. It just goes to show how important it is to know your individual dietary needs. Everyone has a different set of problems, and everything should be tested and personalized to suit you, whether you're 6 or 60. Now let's move on to step 4, which is nutrients. When I say nutrients, what I mean is the whole lot of what your body needs. So that includes vitamins, minerals, amino acids, which come from protein and enzymes, everything you can get in your food. But what you're not getting in your food, what if you're not getting what you need? Either you don't eat the right kinds of food, like we just covered, or somehow it doesn't get through the gut wall into your body, like we've talked about earlier. So how important are they really? Now, I know that most of my clients and myself, I'm no different from everybody else, don't necessarily like taking tablets every day. But if you've got a problem, sometimes there's no other way until the problem is resolved. So let's look at what we can do with them. If these are your levels or your child's levels of brain neurotransmitters right now, too low, caused by everything we've talked about, you might have gone to the doctor, talked to him about ADHD, anxiety, depression, or any other behavioral problems, and been given a script for something to try to make you feel or behave better. This might be any number of medications such as Prozac or Arapax, or maybe you've tried Effexor, or maybe your child has been put on Ritalin or other behavioral medication. The problem is that whether you're on the medication to make you feel better or not, you won't fill the deficiency of the brain neurotransmitter back up to normal levels again, ever, unless you take the nutrients you need to make them in a higher level than what you're getting in your diet. If your diet was providing you with the right level of nutrients, you wouldn't have a problem. So either the diet is wrong, or you're losing way too much of the nutrients through stress, allergy, or bacterial infection. So what can we do about it? It's actually really easy. And this is another way of getting on top of your symptoms within days of beginning treatment. All we need to do is provide the ingredients and we can make them. Let's look at the recipe for serotonin, for instance. First, we need protein. Protein makes the first building blocks for brain neurotransmitters. Then we need vitamins. A few are used more for the brain than others. Then we need enzymes. Remember we talked about these ones earlier during step 1 with allergies, 5-HTP and SAMe. And then very easily we convert these to make serotonin and melatonin for better sleep. It can be as easy as that. Once you can make it, you take away the causes that drop it, such as allergy, and you then have no serotonin problems ever again. What you need to know is this. The enzymes, 5-HTP and SAMe, we can't get them from any food. We either have to make them in our body or have them prescribed in a supplement form by a registered practitioner after face-to-face consultation. They are not allowed to be given out in any other way. I'll often use them in the short term until we stop the causes of your loss of serotonin. If you don't actually need more serotonin, you may produce too much with these supplements, and that can give you more negative side effects, which is why you just can't buy it off the shelf. Dopamine recipe is exactly the same. Step 1, proteins. Step 2, vitamins. Step 3, enzymes. And step 4, you have your brain neurotransmitter. It doesn't make sense why drugs are used to make these when they can be made in hours with the right nutrients, and it works every time. Dopamine then goes on to make boundless energy with the help of vitamin C. The same goes for GABA and acetylcholine, just slightly different nutrients and different parts of the proteins. So let's just recap on how to use nutrients for your brain health. Proteins, vitamins and minerals, enzymes, and when I didn't cover here is essential fatty acids. Everyone talks about fish oil, as our brain is made of fat and the nerves are covered in the nerve fibers that come down from your brain. They are all covered in a layer of fat. Omega-3 plays a crucial role in brain and nerve performance, and that's fish oil. The most important nutrients for the gut are just the same. Proteins, vitamins and minerals, enzymes, essential fatty acids, and one more for the gut. This is your good bacteria to help digest our food and keep a healthy balance, deterring the ones we've just worked so hard to kill off. Nutrient deficiencies can result in ADD and ADHD, ASD and Asperger syndrome, anxiety, depression, and any other behavioral or brain impairment you can think of. And when treating even the most severe cases of brain conditions, nutrient levels should be used in high doses for exceptional results. Just to give you an example of a simple nutritional deficiency causing major concerns is a condition called pyroluria. This is a genetic deficiency of zinc and B6. As you can see here, the mental health conditions affected by this are incredibly high. 50% of autism, 40% of alcoholics, 30% of ADHD, and 70% of schizophrenic or depressed patients. Has your child's levels ever been tested? If you're deficient, your requirements for the nutrients go well above the levels recommended and should be prescribed by a practitioner after a blood test. Do you see how important just one missing nutrient can be? Just one missing nutrient can make all the difference. Do your kids have all the nutrients they need? Are they worth taking if you need them? Moving on to step 5. Step 5 is stress. Stress can be a trigger for a lot of you, which could have begun the whole downward spiral for you. Sometimes this is what we remember to be the case too. Stress can also be a symptom of some of the other causes such as allergy, bacteria, poor diet and low nutrients. So we don't always know which came first. Either way, it has to be resolved somehow. Stress can be brought on by poor health, difficult relationships, falling out with friends, strain in the family home, especially when a member of the family needs more attention. Work relationships or work pressures is a major concern for a lot of people, especially if income is low and financial commitments are really high. Lifestyle can play a major role in stress. Poor sleeping habits, children having to do things they don't enjoy, and struggling with trying to do something their brain won't do for them. School pressures can be difficult for children, especially if they're struggling to keep up or teasing from other children and not fitting in. A loved one's death has severe and immediate effects on your mental health. Stress can come from car accidents or any other kind of accident, and long-term physical or mental abuse will cause dramatic stress on the body and the brain. The first reaction in your body when you're stressed is to use up more of the brain neurotransmitters. This then causes the deficiency. Stress can then impact the gut wall, creating inflammation, which then leads to your bacterial problems and your allergies. Stress makes you produce a hormone called cortisol, which makes more inflammation. But once you produce more cortisol and then make less brain neurotransmitters, causing more stress, this will then trigger the whole process to start all over again. Stress management techniques are essential in life, whether you choose to use the help of a professional to get through it or you work through it yourself. You'll still need to support the body nutritionally to prevent falling into a vicious circle of behavioral problems. Exercise, relaxation, meditation, spending really good quality time with friends or family, or just doing things that are fun. You need to let your kids do things that are fun on a regular basis. These will all help raise your brain neurotransmitters. Children who are always in trouble, for instance, for behavior they can't necessarily control, are under more stress than you can imagine. Keeping this in mind while living with them and trying to discipline them as well can be a fine line that can be tricky to tread until you solve their health problems. Stress can also be managed with different kinds of natural medicine, which I'll always use in conjunction with everything else that I'm treating with my clients. You need to make sure you actively include some of these in life. Step 6. Moving on to step 6, nearly at the end. Toxicity has been proven time and again to play a major role in behavioral and brain disorders. Your liver is the first to respond, which uses your 5-HTP, as we spoke about before, which will immediately reduce your serotonin and cause a mood change. But there are more sinister toxins that can permanently damage the nerves in your brain and nervous system. These toxins include heavy metals, which we've all heard about. Mercury and lead are the most toxic when it comes to mental health. Artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives have a reputation for doing nasty things to our kids' brains. They can enter the bloodstream and scramble the neuronal communication system. Chemical sensitivities, just like food allergies, will affect the liver and the brain. But chemical overloads needs to be detoxified from the body, just the same as heavy metals, and can do permanent damage, blocking the liver and other detoxification pathways in the body. Testing for these toxins is very important, and removing them doesn't have to be a difficult task, but a necessary one. Finally, step 7, and moving on to brainwaves. We're nearly at the end. I'm going to tell you about brainwaves in 2 parts. The first part still fits into our repair section of the webinar. What I need to tell you about brainwaves, I mentioned a little bit in the beginning. I just want you to imagine for a moment a child in a physically abusive home for 10 years or so. Depression and anxiety have become a daily emotion. There is no other choice for him, as he's faced with despair and fear that at any moment anything could happen. His day is filled with more sadness than some of us will feel in a lifetime. Imagine now that after 10 years, something happens to him and to get him out of the environment he's in, and he has a chance for a better life. The child is placed in a loving home. For a short time, the relief is mistaken for happiness, and after a few weeks, anything that the child faces that causes sadness or fear replays the same emotional pattern that he's been through for so long. It's in these extreme situations, the brain disorders won't just go away when you're removed from the situation. It develops a permanent brainwave change that causes behavioral problems for the rest of their life whenever they are faced with fear. The same thing happens with children with ADHD or learning difficulties. What happens with children is, well, this happens also with adults. Often that there is a problem with brainwave patterns responding to an outside source, such as food, infections, or stress, and over the years, where their beta patterns are increased or theta patterns are decreased. I don't know if you've heard of the brain wave patterns, but beta, theta, alpha, delta. When these are changed daily while their brain is developing, everything they learn is learned in this foggy or forgetful or confused state. Then when they get to school and they have to sit still and concentrate, it's just not possible. Their brain has developed poor brainwave patterns already, and at some stage in their life, they'll have to be retrained. Well, you can go without it, but you'll struggle. Medication doesn't retrain these brainwaves, and that's what the drugs are being given out for, which is to manage these problems. If they're not retrained, they'll just graduate from ADHD to depression or adult ADHD as they get older. These types of situations that can cause long-term brainwave pattern changes are long-term stress, long-term abuse, just like I mentioned. Long-term allergy can do it. This is what happens with the ADHD or ADD kids in most cases, or the long-term bacterial infection not being picked up early enough. Long-term nutrient deficiencies. Of course, if the brain isn't functioning at full capacity while learning, it's not going to get good results. Heavy metal toxicity or chemical sensitivities can also be a contributing factor. There are ways to detoxify heavy metals, but the diet and nutrients we cover in most cases helps these a little bit because it makes your liver work better. Drug abuse, obviously, you change your behavior and your brainwaves each time you use illicit drugs, but doing this over and over again will always have a powerfully permanent effect. And also an accident or a blow to the head, a blow to the head or head injury in some way can change the brainwave patterns. So you can see here we have different parts of the brain where if there are damage or brainwave problems coming from any of these particular areas, you can have different mental health conditions diagnosed. The conditions are all given different names based on the combination of symptoms someone suffers with, but they actually all come from brainwave pattern variations that are different to the normal. These include ADHD, chronic lateness and disorganization, anxiety and clinical depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, appetite and eating disorders such as anorexia or bulimia, addictive behavior, being oppositional and argumentative, autism spectrum disorders, Asperger's syndrome, sleep disorders of different kinds, and night terrors, which is actually a form of sleep ADHD, negative thoughts and social isolation, tics, Tourette's and muscle tension, seizures, tremors, and fine motor problems. To identify exactly what's going on inside your brain or your child's brain, we need to do a test. This is a QEEG, which stands for, you don't have to remember this by the way, quantitative electroencephalograph. What this does is measures the brain function of your brain, or measures the function. It picks up and records your brainwave patterns so that you can see how different from the normal the brainwave patterns are. Once you have an accurate recording, we're able to work out the best way to reprogram the brain if it turns out to be necessary. So you can see here on the slides the grey areas are normal and the coloured areas are either too active in some brainwaves and underactive in others. The warmer the colour, the more overactive they are, so reds and yellows and orange, and the cooler the colour, the more blue and green, the more underactive they are. Your brainwave patterns include delta, which is the lowest Hertz level, then theta, alpha, beta, and gamma. These are all used in the brain for different things, such as delta and theta are mostly produced during sleep or meditation. Alpha waves are during a relaxed state, but while you're awake, and beta waves are produced when you're listening and attentive and learning or functioning. So I hope you guys are using your beta brainwaves this far into the webinar. So we want the brainwaves to be happening for the right things at the right times. When things go wrong, what we see are things like the beta waves happening much higher than they should, and this causes excessive behaviors and emotions such as anxiety, stress, nervousness, panic attacks, being on edge, and then also ADHD, hypervigilance, hyperactivity, and inability to stay focused on anything. Just going back to the two case studies from earlier, this is Dylan's QEEG whilst he was still on Ritalin. Shows high levels of alpha waves. In the second line there to the right you see the red colour in the second line at the end. These are his alpha brainwaves, which is lower. What this does is lowers his dopamine and reduces his brain function, causing foggy head, difficulty concentrating and learning difficulties. This will also cause ADHD symptoms and signs of depression. He also has high levels of delta, which is the very first circle on the top left-hand row, which also contribute to difficulty trying to learn. And his high levels of beta, you can see in the bottom row in the red, causes anticipatory anxiety, which means that whenever he's going to be tested on something or if he's put under pressure in any way, he's going to be really afraid beforehand, and this will make him react with anger or aggression. Collectively, all of these problems will cause what they diagnose as ADHD. Now, this is Sarah's QEEG, which shows a very different story through the same diagnosis. She had ADHD as well. She was previously on all sorts of drugs, including dexamphetamines and drugs usually used for epilepsies to reduce the hyperactivity of her brain. She had high levels of brain waves at all frequency bands, from delta through to beta, causing anxiety, hypervigilance, distractibility, attention and learning problems, foggy head and confusion. You can see at the bottom of the screen, all the blue lines on the brain shows where two areas are not communicating with each other. Imagine trying to complete a task when you can't figure out how to get the process happening, when different parts of your brain aren't communicating with each other. Imagine how your child might feel if that's what's happening in his or her brain. How about really frustrated? You ever seen your kids frustrated? Just to make sure you're not asleep, give me a hand raise if you've been frustrated because of not being able to figure something out, or if you've seen your child frustrated. Oh, some of you are not asleep. Some of you may never have been frustrated. I'd say some of you are asleep. It's quite late into the webinar. Adam was a very intelligent, funny, well-mannered boy from a lovely family that I treated at aged 11. He went through the 7-step program after he was diagnosed with ADHD, hypervigilance, distractibility, distracting classmates, difficulty focusing at school, argumentative, behavioural problems, and difficulty completing tasks from start to finish. What was happening to him was that he had different parts of his brain that weren't communicating with each other, just like Sarah. You can see here, this is part of his QEEG report that showed the communication between different sections of his brain. You'll notice in the delta area on the left, there are lots of blue lines. These are areas that are not communicating between these points. He struggled to know how to achieve the end results when asked to do a project. He knew the request and he knew what the outcome was supposed to be, but couldn't figure out the steps in the middle that he needed to do to achieve that. After 4 months of treatment, this is his follow-up QEEG, and you can see how the blue lines have diminished, and there is more normal communication there. He'd improved out of sight and was getting better at school. This was just 4 months. A test that we run in the clinic here for people who go through this kind of treatment to measure their improvements along the way is called the TOVA test, which measures attention disorders such as ADHD. This test is from the US and is widely used by psychiatrists to measure the response to treatment in ADHD children. Now you'll see in the top of the screen his first test result before he started any reprogramming at all. An ADHD score of less than 1.8 in a negative fits the profile of an ADHD patient. A score of more than 1.8 in a negative, so more positive than negative 1.8, does not fit the ADHD profile. When comparing ADHD scores, the higher the ADHD score, the better the performance. Very complicated. Now you'll see his first test on the 9th of February came in at minus 2.35. So you can see there that that is a more negative result than the minus 1.8, which puts him in the middle of an ADHD. So his diagnosis of ADHD was correct. He wasn't on any medication though, and his parents wanted to try something else first. So after 2 months of reprogramming, by the 16th of April, his score had now improved to a positive 0.5, well out of an ADHD range. And then after another few months, his score increased further out of ADHD range to 1.25 in a positive, which was just fantastic. He was really a wonderful, polite and lovely kid. He previously wouldn't try any new toys that his young sister had if they were too complicated to use, and had never picked up a book to read. With everything we asked him to do through treatment, he followed to the letter, and his parents were amazing, as you really need the support of people around you to help you with the changes you need to make, and some of them can be tough. Actually, it usually is tough just trying to make these new changes or new habits, let alone trying to do it when you're an 11-year-old boy. But after following the plan we set out to the letter, he had incredible results. He was then thinking more clearly and behaving a lot better. His mother was so happy. We both had tears of happiness at his last testing. He was actually carrying the book Inkart. He made sure he brought it into the clinic to show me. It was so thick, like The Hobbit. I don't know if you've seen the Inkart before. If none of you have seen it, it's a really thick book, and he was reading through it. He was really proud of himself, and so he should have been. All over, it was an amazing transformation for him, and he's still doing really well. I'll tell you how we achieved these results in part 2 of Brainwaves, which is coming up. But I wanted to share with you the most exciting thing about everything we did for him and with reprogramming. And that is the results are permanent. He'll never go back to the problems he had before. He'll never struggle at school again. He'll get great grades, and every opportunity that's offered to him in life will be something he can really go for and not have to turn down because of not being able to achieve them. His parents have given him the best opportunities by addressing his health while his mind is still young and changing. He could have been destined to struggle in school and possibly in work for the rest of his life without this treatment. It's completely changed his path in life. So before I show you what we did with him, I just want to recap what we've covered so far, because this is what we did with him. 1, we've covered recognizing your problems and understanding your brain. And 2, we've now covered repairing your brain and body biochemically. Reprogramming is the next and final stage to completely and permanently solving ADHD and all other behavioral and learning disorders. By now, I'm hoping you realize how important each and every step along the way to balancing your brain function really is. Every step can influence your brain in a positive way when you're healthy, and for the worse if you're not healthy. Let's move on now to the final part of step 7, which is brainwave reprogramming. So we showed you how to get the QEEG to test what brainwave patterns are imbalanced for you. Now let's look at how to fix it. Neurotherapy, which is not a new technique, it's been around in the US for at least the past 15 to 20 years. It has so much research behind it, up to 90% success rate for all of the conditions treated, which is outstanding since medication has only about 12% success rate, it's like a tongue twister, and neurotherapy has been proven to be permanent, where medication isn't. How it works is that once we have a test result showing which part of your brain has the imbalance, we then put a cap on your head which has electrodes attached, and this reads your brain waves and what they're doing at any time. We attach that to the computer and begin a program that plays some sort of media, such as a movie or games. How it reprograms you is that we set the computer to reward you by making the movie or games play when you produce the brainwaves in the correct levels. And if you're outside those levels again, the movie or the game pauses, so it keeps you switched on. The beauty of it is that your brain figures out in as little as 2 sessions how to get it into the right zones. And from then on, it's automatic as soon as you start your sessions. It becomes really easy. It has successfully treated ADHD and ADD, anxiety, depression, epilepsy, obsessive compulsive disorders, learning disabilities, bipolar disorder, conduct disorders, anger and rage, autism, Asperger's syndrome, sleep disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, and it has improved dementia. It's really the final touch to making your brain work like clockwork, and I've seen it time and time again in the clinic with people of all ages and all problems. I have a lot of research on this, so if you'd like more information and if you have any questions for tonight's webinar, just email me. The email address is info@advancedwellness.com.au. So that's info@advancedwellness.com.au. Any questions at all for tonight's webinar, please be sure to go to the website and send me an email, and I'll answer as many as I can. I want to thank you for listening here tonight, and I hope you've learned a lot from the information I have for you. I've seen a lot of families with really difficult situations and really high stress levels because of the things that they have to go through with children with ADHD and Aspergers and autism. And I hope it helps you find the answers to what your needs are. And I also hope that I can help you in some way in the future. I'll be looking forward to talking to you if you want to contact the clinic at all and have a chat, or if you'd like to email me. You can email the clinic from the website if you have any questions about the programs, and someone will get back to you as soon as we can. So, have a wonderful night.